My cousins cut me out of the will. You're not a real daughter, just the bastard child. But at the final hearing, when the DNA results were unsealed, it turned out they were the ones who shared no blood with my father. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own family's house? That there was a story about you that everyone seemed to know, except you? I was 32 when I finally realized that the hushed conversations I'd overhear at my Grandma Amelia's Sunday dinners weren't just about her secret pecan pie recipe. My cousins, Mark and Claire, were always the stars of the show, the true heirs, as my Aunt Beatrice loved to call them, her voice sharp over the clinking ice in her mint julep during our 4th of July parties in Charleston. All I ever wanted was to understand the deep, aching sadness in my father's eyes whenever the whole family gathered to sing Happy Birthday. Let me tell you how. At 32 years old, I discovered that my entire life was built on a foundation of secrets. Secrets that, like the notorious humidity seeping into the floorboards of the Ashworth mansion, were silently rotting away everything I thought was real. The Ashworth family home wasn't just a house, it was a landmark. You know the kind I'm talking about, one of those historic Charleston mansions south of Broad Street, the ones tourists stop to photograph, framed by ancient live oaks dripping with Spanish moss. I grew up behind those ornate wrought iron gates, but did I ever feel like I belonged there? Not for a second. That was me, Anna Grace, the daughter everyone treated with a smile that never quite reached their eyes. She doesn't have the Ashworth features, my aunts would whisper during Sunday brunches, and I'd just pretend not to hear while helping myself to another serving of the low country boil that our housekeeper, Mrs. Josie, seasoned to perfection. But my cousins, Mark and Claire? Oh, they were the genuine articles, a fact Aunt Beatrice made sure to announce between sips of her drink at every family gathering. Good breeding always shows, she'd declare, adjusting the gold bangles that chimed like a warning bell. All the while, my father would watch me from across the room with a heartbreakingly sad smile, the kind that held secrets as old as the locked trunks in the attic he never let me explore. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the conversation just stop? The family gatherings on our sprawling piazza, with its blue-painted ceiling to ward off spirits, always fell silent the moment I stepped outside. It was as if my very presence could cut a conversation dead. Just adult stuff, Anna, my cousin Mark would say, flashing the kind of slick, condescending smile that already seemed practiced for a courtroom. At 32, with a degree and a career teaching history at Northwood High, I was still treated like a child when it came to family matters. What was the big secret? Why did their eyes dart away whenever I asked about the gold signet ring with the Ashworth crest that all the men wore, except for my father when he was with me? At family birthday dinners, my seat was always predictably at the far end of the long mahogany table, miles away from the center of power where the real Ashworths sat. My Uncle Arthur, the one who always had a bit too much bourbon and not enough of a filter, once slurred, "The girl looks more like the groundskeeper's kid than Charles Edwards." A chilling silence fell over the dining room, but no one, not a single person, corrected him. My father simply excused himself from the table, only to return 20 minutes later with bloodshot eyes. I swallowed the humiliation along with my birthday cake, just as I always did. The worst part wasn't even the doubt he planted in my mind. It was watching my own father fail to stand up for me. Or was he standing up for me just in ways I was too young to understand? My dad had this way of hugging me. It was always too tight, held for too long, as if he were trying to apologize for something he could never bring himself to say. For my birthday, every single year, he'd take me out alone to the Palmetto Scoop, our favorite little ice cream shop on King Street. It was a tradition we kept even after I turned 30. "My little princess," he'd murmur, and even as a grown woman, I'd blush with a mix of embarrassment and pure joy. In those moments, far from the mansion and the judgmental glare of Aunt Beatrice, I truly felt like his daughter. But why did we have to leave our own home for him to be my father? My mother was a vault of poorly kept secrets. I can't count the times I found her quietly crying over a box of old photographs, which she'd quickly hide the second she noticed me. "It's just the dust, honey. These old memory boxes." She'd lie, her red-rimmed eyes telling a completely different story. Teresa Ashworth, the former executive assistant who married the boss, was never really welcomed into the family's inner circle. She pulled the oldest trick in the book. I once heard Aunt Beatrice snipe to a friend during a charity luncheon, not realizing I was standing right behind the kitchen door, holding a lemon cake and feeling a lump form in my throat. What did that even mean? Was I the personification of that trick? Mr. Mendel, the family's attorney, had a peculiar habit of never making eye contact with me. At family events, he'd greet everyone else with a firm handshake or a polite kiss on the cheek, but he'd only give me a curt nod from a distance. On Sundays, he and my dad would play chess on the patio, laughing over glasses of expensive Kentucky bourbon. One afternoon, as I brought them fresh drinks, I caught a fragment of their conversation that would echo in my mind for years. "Charles Edward, the truth has a way of coming out. Wouldn't it be better if it came from you?" My dad just shook his head and quickly changed the subject when he saw me approach. What truth? What was this thing that everyone around me seemed to be guarding? Then there was the official family photo album in the library, the one bound in leather with the Ashworth crest embossed in gold. Page after page was filled with photos of Mark and Claire, birthdays, graduations, ski trips to Aspen. My entire life was condensed into 2 lonely pages at the back, like a footnote in the grand history of the Ashworths. One night, while sneaking a look at the album, I found a loose photograph tucked into the back cover. It was my mother, pregnant and glowing, standing on a beach next to my smiling father. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "Teresa and our little miracle, 1990. A miracle? Why would he call me that? And why was this picture, this beautiful, happy moment, hidden away instead of being displayed with the others? I kept it, my one small, secret treasure, my silent proof that once, at least for a moment, I had been a celebrated part of their world. The phone call felt like a physical blow. "Your father had a heart attack at the office," Mark said, his voice far too calm, too controlled for someone who had just lost his uncle. I was at Northwood High, dressed in a ridiculous sequined jumpsuit for the school's Mardi Gras fundraiser for the senior class. I bolted out of there, didn't even stop to change, my tears smudging the gold glitter a student had painted on my face just minutes before. I jumped into the first cab I saw, heading for the MUSC hospital downtown, the sound of the school's jazz band rehearsing "When the Saints Go Marching In" fading behind me. A song that was supposed to be so joyful had never sounded so much like a funeral dirge. Have you ever had that terrifying feeling that your life has just turned into a tragedy and no one handed you the script? The scene at the hospital felt like a carefully staged play, and I was the only one who hadn't been given a script. Mark was already there, looking impossibly pristine in a tailored suit despite the supposed shock, huddled in a corner with Mr. Mendel. Papers were being discreetly signed, and the low hum of their smartphones never seemed to stop. Over by the window, Claire was performing a delicate, quiet sob, propped up by her mother, Aunt Beatrice, who dabbed at invisible tears with a silk Hermes scarf. "Oh, Anna Grace is here," she announced, her tone a perfect blend of surprise and irritation, as if I'd just shown up late for a board meeting instead of arriving to say goodbye to my own father. No one said a word about my ridiculous sequined jumpsuit. No one offered a hug, a cup of coffee, or even a place to sit. It was hours before they finally let me see him. He was lying on a cold gurney in the morgue, his life extinguished. The lips that had always been so quick with a smile or a story were now sealed forever, and I was terrified that all his secrets were sealed along with them. "We need to begin the probate process," Mark said, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture of such hollow sympathy it made my skin crawl, even as I was still holding my father's icy hand. In the background, I could hear Mr. Mendel on his phone. "Yes, we can proceed as planned." Planned? What in God's name was going on? Why did my father's death feel less like a family tragedy and more like a corporate merger? As the others discussed the grim logistics of it all, a nurse, one of those true angels you sometimes find in the bleakest of places, gently pulled me aside. "Your father was asking for you right up until the end," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "He told me to give you this if you didn't make it in time." It was a folded, crumpled envelope, the kind that's lived in a wallet for far too long. Inside, a hastily scribbled note read, "Anna Grace, my true-born daughter. Check the safe at the beach house. The code is your birthday. Forgive me for not being braver. All my love." Your dad. I shoved the note deep into my pocket, my hand trembling before anyone else could see it. Was this the key to unlocking the fog of secrets that had clouded my entire life? Or was it just the rambling of a dying man? The wake was held in the grand parlor of the mansion, the one with the gilded mirrors and velvet settees we were only allowed to use on special occasions. My father, a man who had always wanted a simple service, was now surrounded by opulent arrangements of white calla lilies and deep red roses, a display of wealth meant to impress the living, not honor the dead. I stood in a corner and watched the parade of Charleston's elite, the mayor, real estate developers, city council members. They'd sign the condolence book and then make a beeline for Mark, whispering about the continuity of the business and future partnerships. What kind of a wake is more about networking than remembering? Aunt Beatrice would let out a theatrical wail whenever a new guest arrived, but in the lulls, I saw her on her phone, fiercely whispering about stock portfolios. "Don't sell anything yet. Wait for my signal," she commanded, her head snapping around to see if she was being watched. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and she immediately transformed back into the inconsolable sister-in-law. "My dear, sweet brother," she cried to some society matron. "How will we ever carry on without his guidance?" It was like watching a terrible, under-rehearsed play, where the actors dropped character the moment they thought the audience wasn't looking. It was close to midnight, as the crowd thinned, that I overheard the conversation from my father's study. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar, spilling a slice of yellow light, and their hushed voices into the hallway. "She doesn't need to know everything just yet," Mark was saying. "Let's get the estate settled first, then we'll deal with Anna Grace." Claire's voice was hesitant. "But what if she finds out about the will before then?" Mark let out that cold, dismissive laugh that always made my blood run cold. "Not a chance. Mr. Mendel is already handling it." What were they plotting? What will? And why was I, Charles Edward's only child, a problem to be handled? I retreated to my childhood bedroom, a room that had never truly felt like mine. More like I was borrowing it, always waiting for someone to ask for it back. On the antique vanity sat the framed photo of my father and me at my college graduation. I was beaming in my cap and gown, and he had that look of quiet, profound pride. Next to it was the hidden photo I'd found of my pregnant mother, of their little miracle. And now, there was the crumpled note from the nurse. 3 pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet fit together. I cried until the sun came up, not just for my father, but for all the years of feeling like an outsider in my own home. I had to get to that beach house, and I had to get there fast, before Mark and Aunt Beatrice found out about the note and beat me to it. 2 weeks after the funeral, while I was still trying to navigate a world without my dad, I was served with a subpoena. I remember I was grading papers on the American Revolution when the doorbell rang. A skinny process server who looked like he was perpetually apologizing for his own existence handed me a thick envelope. "You need to sign here, ma'am," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Inside was a document filled with dense legalese that boiled down to one shocking claim. My cousins were formally contesting the will, alleging that I was not my father's biological child. The floor fell out from under me. How could I not be his daughter? And why, when I called my mother, sobbing, did she just say, "We need to talk in person," in the most defeated voice I had ever heard? Mr. Mendel's office looked like a movie set for a legal thriller. Dark mahogany paneling, dusty law books, and the smell of stale coffee and old paper. Mark was sitting there as if he owned the place, legs crossed, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Claire wouldn't look at me. "Anna Grace, we have documents that prove Charles Edward is not your biological father," Mr. Mendel announced, sliding a yellowed birth certificate across the desk. In the space for father's name, it was blank. My heart hammered against my ribs. This couldn't be real. "This is a fake," I yelled, jumping to my feet. "I have my birth certificate at home, and his name is on it." Mark's smirk widened. "That would be the amended copy, dear cousin. The one my uncle had altered out of the kindness of his heart." I hired Julian, a sharp young lawyer I'd known in college. His office was a small, cramped space in a less glamorous part of downtown Charleston, with a rattling window AC unit that fought a losing battle against the summer heat. He examined the documents with a focus that gave me a flicker of hope. "This is very sloppy, Anna," he said, tapping the document. "This certificate has some serious inconsistencies." His finger traced the inconsistencies on the page. A notary seal that didn't match state records. Dates that were chronologically impossible. "We're going to petition the court for a DNA test. For all presumptive heirs," Julian said, his voice brimming with a new, sharp-edged confidence. "If they're so certain of their claim, they shouldn't have any problem with that, right?" A cold dread washed over me. What if the test proved them right? What if my entire identity was just a well-told lie? But then, a stubborn fire ignited deep within me. Maybe it was the Ashworth blood they denied I had, and I knew I had to see this through to the end. I left Julian's office with a cocktail of fear and fury fizzing in my chest. The crumpled note from my father felt like a burning coal in my pocket. This was my next move, and I had to make it alone. I didn't tell my lawyer about it. This was a final, shared secret between my dad and me. On my way home, I stopped by the school to request a few days off. The principal, Mrs. Davison, a woman with kind eyes that had seen a lifetime of hardship, didn't press for details. "You go take care of your family business, Anna Grace," she said warmly. "We'll hold down the fort here." As I confessed my fear, that I might discover my father wasn't my father at all, she just shook her head gently. "A father is the one who raises you, my dear. The rest is just a detail on a lab report." Those words became my mantra, a source of strength I didn't yet know how desperately I would need. My investigation began at the Charleston Library Society, a historic building downtown that smelled of old paper and leather-bound promises. It was a scent that had always calmed me. For 3 days straight after school, I disappeared into the archives, scrolling through reels of dusty microfiche, searching for any mention of the Ashworth family that seemed out of place. The librarians, sensing the urgency in my quest, reluctantly helped me unearth these forgotten records as if they were classified government secrets. On the 4th day, I found it. Tucked away in a 1990 Society column from the Post and Courier was a grainy photograph of Aunt Beatrice. She was laughing, wrapped in the arms of Mr. Alexander Vance, my father's partner at his development firm. The caption read, "The charming lovebirds were inseparable at Charles Edward Ashworth's recent birthday gala." Lovebirds? But wasn't she married to Uncle Arthur back then? And wasn't that the exact year Mark and Claire were born? That night, a call from a blocked number jolted me awake at 3 a.m. You know the kind of call that makes your heart stop before you even answer? "Look in the attic crawl space of the main bedroom, at the beach house," a woman's voice said quickly, before the line went dead. I recognized the faint melodic Gullah accent immediately. It was Mrs. Josie, our family's cook for decades, whom Aunt Beatrice had fired right after my father's funeral. The next morning, I drove the 2 hours out to Kiowa Island, the car feeling heavy, as if it were weighed down by the secrets I was about to uncover. The house was cold and still, smelling of salt and neglect. Armed with a stepladder and a flashlight, I pulled down the attic door. As I climbed up, my sneezes from the thick dust mingled with the frantic beating of my heart. There, hidden behind old insulation and shrouded in spiderwebs, was a faded shoebox. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it, its contents scattering across the dusty floorboards of the bedroom below. They were letters, love letters between my mother and father, painting a picture of a romance I never knew existed. How they met, how they fell in love, how they fought both of their families to be together. "My love, I don't care what my sister says. You and our daughter are my only true family," one letter from 1992 read. But buried beneath the declarations of love was a thick, sealed envelope, the wax brittle with age. Inside, a time-yellowed DNA report. The result? Probability of paternity, 99.98%. It was a test between my father and me. But there was another one, from the very same lab, dated the same year. This one delivered a result that made the air leave my lungs. Probability of paternity, 0%. The names on the report? Mark Ashworth and Claire Ashworth. The tested father, Charles Edward Ashworth. The safe my father mentioned in his note was exactly where you'd expect a man like him to hide something, behind a tacky painting of a sailboat on the water. I punched in my birthday, 9/07/1990. With a soft click, the heavy door swung open, Inside was another set of documents, including a handwritten will, completely different from the one Mark was pushing, properly signed and notarized. In it, my father divided his estate into 3 equal shares. One for me, one to be split between Mark and Claire, and a third to endow an educational foundation. A letter attached to the will explained everything. He had discovered years ago that his niece and nephew were not his blood relatives, but the result of an affair between Aunt Beatrice and his business partner, Alexander Vance. He chose to protect the children, to love them as his own, while also protecting me, his only biological child. Family is about more than DNA, he wrote. But I fear my sister does not share that belief. That is why I am leaving you this proof, my daughter. Use it only if you must. I sat on the dusty bed in that beach house, the same one where my dad used to tell me bedtime stories about pirates and shipwrecks, just staring at the scattered pieces of my family's history. All the answers were right there in front of me, but my mind couldn't seem to assemble them. I called Joe, the kind man who had been our family's driver for 30 years before retiring to a small farm outside the city. "Oh, honey, your father knew everything for years," he told me, his voice raspy from a lifetime of smoking. He found out about Mrs. Beatrice and his partner when the twins were about 5, but he was too good of a man. He wanted to protect those kids. It wasn't their fault, you know? On the drive back to Charleston, I stopped at St. Jude's nursing home to see Lourdes, the nanny who had raised all of us. I found her on the sun porch, her gnarled hands still deftly crocheting, her cloudy eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Anna, my girl, I have been praying you would come." She wasn't surprised when I told her what I'd found. "Your aunt was always crazy about that, Alexander," she confessed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Her husband was always traveling for work, and there he was, available. But the worst part was her letting your father believe those children were his bloodkin, at least for a while. My blood began to boil. "Then why did no one ever tell me?" I asked, choking back tears of pure rage. Lourdes's answer was like a slap in the face. "Because your father made everyone swear an oath of silence. He said family was thicker than water, even when it wasn't his water, and that the children were innocent. He loved those kids, Anna, even knowing the truth." She took my hands in hers, her own eyes welling up with tears. "But you, my sweet girl, you were his only true child, the only legitimate Ashworth. That's why your aunt was always so jealous, and it's why your father always protected you so fiercely." I left that place carrying the crushing weight of a story that wasn't just mine. It was the story of a whole family, tangled in a web of lies, love, secrets, and sacrifice. It felt like a scene from some William Faulkner novel my mother used to love, one where sin and virtue are forced to dance a slow, awkward waltz in the humid southern air. My next stop had to be Savannah, Georgia, where my mother had taken refuge at her sister's house after the funeral. She was waiting for me on the porch swing, as if she'd known all along that I was coming, armed with a lifetime of questions. She spoke before I could even form the words. "You found the papers, didn't you?" The questions tumbled out of me in a torrent of grief and anger. "Why, Mom? Why would you both hide this from me my entire life? How could you let me be treated like a second-class citizen in my own family when I was the only one who truly belonged?" She sighed, her weathered hands smoothing the fabric of her floral dress. "Your father believed the truth would only detonate a bomb in the middle of our lives. He thought he was protecting everyone. You, the twins, even Beatrice. He forgave his sister's betrayal, but the first thing he did was get a test to make sure you were his." A sad smile touched her lips. "When it came back positive, he wept with joy. He said you were his miracle, his true legacy. But he couldn't bring himself to destroy his niece and nephew by revealing the truth about their own parentage." On the day of the final hearing, the Charleston County Courthouse on Broad Street seemed more imposing than ever. It was a grand columned building, a temple consecrated not to God, but to a different kind of faith. A faith in documents, in notarized seals, in the arcane language that dictates destinies. I walked in with my head held high, wearing the only blazer I owned, bought on clearance at Belk for a job interview years ago. It was a stark contrast to Mark's custom-tailored suit and Claire's Chanel-esque tweed set. My lawyer, Julian, had beads of sweat on his forehead despite the Arctic blast of the air conditioning. "You brought everything?" he asked for the 10th time. I just nodded, clutching the portfolio containing the secrets from the beach house to my chest. The courtroom itself was draped in an artificial silence that felt heavy on my shoulders. The judge, a man named Lawrence Hayes, had thick, severe eyebrows that merged into one when he was focused. Aunt Beatrice swept in like a deposed queen, draped in black, with tasteful jewelry and dark circles under her eyes that were either genuine or expertly applied. For a single charged moment, our eyes locked, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before. Raw fear. She quickly looked away, settling herself beside her children. Across the aisle, Mr. Mendel, their lawyer, smiled with the easy confidence of a man who believes he's already won. "Let's begin!" the judge's voice boomed, and I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to leap into waters of an unknown depth. The legal jargon washed over me in a slow, tedious river. Motions were filed, statutes were cited, and technical arguments were made that made my head ache with the strain of it all. Mark kept shooting me smug, superior glances. Claire seemed utterly absorbed by her manicure. And then, the moment arrived. "We will now address the results of the court-ordered DNA analysis," Judge Hayes announced, picking up a large, sealed manila envelope. If it was possible, the room grew even quieter. I could feel my own pulse hammering in my throat. Julian gave my arm a gentle squeeze, a small gesture of solidarity. Across the room, Aunt Beatrice sat bolt upright, her face suddenly the color of candle wax. Mr. Mendel cleared his throat, a nervous twitch in his jaw. The judge opened the envelope with a deliberate slowness, as if he understood he wasn't just holding a lab report, but the very blueprint of our family's future. The sound of the paper tearing open seemed to echo like a gunshot in the tense silence. I realized I was holding my breath, as if exhaling might somehow change the words on that page. I could see Mark gripping Claire's hand, his knuckles white with pressure. Mr. Mendel was adjusting his tie as if it were suddenly strangling him. My mother had refused to come, saying she couldn't bear to watch the circus, even if it was, in her words, a cleansing fire. I thought of my father and how his entire life had been an effort to avoid this exact moment, preferring a peaceful lie to a painful truth. But it was too late. The truth, that stubborn, relentless force, was about to dance naked for everyone to see. "According to the certified lab results," the judge began, adjusting his reading glasses on his nose, "the probability of Charles Edward Ashworth being the biological father of Ms. Anna Grace Ashworth is 99.98%. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, which was instantly silenced by the judge's sharp glare. As for the other parties, Mr. Mark Ashworth and Ms. Claire Ashworth, the results indicate—" He paused, his eyes landing directly on Aunt Beatrice. "A paternal exclusion. The probability is 0%. It was as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on my aunt. A strangled noise, half gasp and half sob, escaped her lips. "Impossible! It's a lie! The test was manipulated!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. The judge's gavel slammed down with a deafening crack. That was Julian's cue. He rose to his feet and presented the documents from the safe. "Your Honor, we have here a DNA test conducted by Charles Ashworth himself in 1992, which shows the exact same results." As he spoke, I watched their faces crumble. Mark looked like he'd been physically struck, his face pale and slack-jawed. Claire was now openly weeping. Mr. Mendel looked like he had aged a decade in a single minute. But it was Aunt Beatrice's face that I will never forget. A mask of pure horror, as if her every sin had just been tattooed across her forehead for the world to read. Judge Hayes examined the documents, his frown deepening with every page he turned. "These papers indicate that Mr. Ashworth was aware as early as 1992 that he was not the biological father of Mark and Claire Ashworth." He took off his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as if fighting off a migraine. "However, as evidenced by these personal letters and by the original last will and testament found with them, he chose to raise and provide for them as his own." He then looked directly at me, and his stern expression softened with something that looked almost like compassion. "Your father, Ms. Ashworth, knew precisely what he was doing. In the letter he left for you, He explained that he kept this secret to protect all of you, stating that in his heart, family was more than blood. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I thought of all the times my dad had hugged me just a little too tight, for a little too long, as if he were trying to silently apologize for a secret that wasn't even his to keep. And in that moment, a confusing storm of emotions washed over me. Overwhelming relief that the truth was finally out, a profound sadness for the pain it was causing, and a strange, new anger at the man I loved most in the world. Why couldn't he have faced this while he was still alive? Why? Why would he let me endure years of feeling like an outsider when I was the only one with his blood running in my veins? But then, as I looked at the shattered expressions on my cousins' faces, I finally understood the impossible, soul-crushing dilemma my father had faced. To reveal the truth would have been to detonate the very foundation of their identities. But to hide it meant condemning me to a life as a stranger in my own home. He chose a third, messier path, to protect everyone, in his own flawed way, by carrying the crushing weight of that secret all by himself. And in that moment, I realized that the truth, this thing we all claim to want, doesn't always arrive with a gentle hand. Sometimes it kicks the door in, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. The marble corridor outside the courtroom felt like a battlefield after the cannons have fallen silent. Everyone left standing was exhausted, wounded, and trying to make sense of the carnage. Mark was slumped against a wall, his face buried in his hands, while Claire sobbed quietly on a polished wooden bench. Aunt Beatrice, after a dramatic near collapse, had been escorted out by a court officer. I walked toward my cousins, could I even call them that anymore, with hesitant steps. "What now?" I asked, my voice devoid of anger, filled only with a profound weariness. Mark looked up, his eyes red from a battle lost against tears. "Now, it's over for us, isn't it? We've lost everything, not just the money, but our name, our entire lives. Who even are we now?" It was the first time I had ever seen a single shred of genuine vulnerability in his calculating eyes. Just then, Julian came rushing back down the hall, waving a file. "Anna, the judge wants a private word with you." I re-entered the now empty courtroom. Judge Hayes had removed his black robe, and without it, seemed much more like a mortal man. "Please sit down," he said gently. "There's something else you need to see." He slid the letter my father had left in the safe across the table. I recognized the elegant, deliberate handwriting immediately. "My dearest daughter," it began, "by the time you read this, I will be gone. The truth I kept for so long is too heavy a burden to carry into the next life. As you now know, Mark and Claire are not my biological kin, but I raised them as family, because in my heart, they were. The Ashworth blood may not run in their veins, but it runs strong in yours. And the greatest trait the Ashworths have always possessed is the capacity to forgive and to rebuild." I walked out of that chamber a different person than the one who had walked in. The shock was still there, but beneath it, a strange sense of peace was beginning to settle. In his true will, my father had divided his estate between the three of us, but with one major condition. We had to work together to run the family business. "A ship can't sail," he'd written, "if the crew is rowing in different directions." I found Mark and Claire still in the hallway, now joined by a shell-shocked Mr. Mendel. They all looked like they were attending a second funeral. "Come with me," I said, the words coming out before I had a chance to think them through. "Let's get some coffee and talk about what Dad really wanted." They stared at me, bewildered. "Dad?" Claire asked, her voice cracking. "Yes, Dad," I replied, feeling the immense gravity of that word. "The man who raised us, the man who loved us, each in his own way. You may not be Ashworths by blood, but he made damn sure you were Ashworths by heart, and no DNA test or court order can ever take that away." That afternoon, at a quiet table at the Copperpot Cafe, with its worn marble tops and wrought iron chairs, three people who no longer knew who they were tried to sketch out the blueprint for a new kind of family. Mark, who had always been the epitome of self-assurance, now seemed like a lost little boy. "I don't even know who my real father is," he said, his voice breaking. "I spent my whole life resenting Uncle Arthur, holding on to the idea that Uncle Charles was my real father figure. And now, I don't even have that. Claire, always so perfectly composed, cried silently, her expensive mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. I always knew something was wrong, she confessed. I could feel this secret that Mom was keeping. But I never, ever imagined it was this. I chose the copper pot on purpose. It was a neutral space, not as stuffy as the mansion or as cold as a lawyer's office, with the smell of fresh brewed coffee and pecan pie hanging in the air. Mark ordered his coffee black, no sugar, as bitter as he felt. Claire didn't even touch the latte I ordered for her. I placed the will on the table between us. He knew everything, I said quietly, and he still left a third of his entire estate to each of us, but with that one condition, that we run the company together. Mark let out a humorless laugh. Together? As a family? After all this? The waitress brought over 3 slices of pecan pie, the dessert my dad always claimed was his only weakness. No one made a move to eat. My lawyer is going to appeal, Mark said suddenly, the old fire returning to his eyes. We'll claim undue influence, contest the will on a technicality. There's always a way. The calculating Mark was back. I shook my head, more saddened than angered. Is that really what you want? More fighting, more courtrooms and public humiliation? Look what this has already done to your mother. Aunt Beatrice had been admitted to a private hospital for nervous exhaustion. Then what do you suggest, St. Anna Grace? He spat, the words dripping with venom. That we all just hold hands and pretend none of this ever happened? Play the happy family for some TV commercial? It was Claire who broke the standoff. Silent until now, she placed her hand over her brother's. Stop it, Mark. Just stop. She's right. Tears streamed down her face. Uncle Charles, Dad, he knew. He knew everything, and he still loved us. He gave us the best schools, every opportunity, his love. What our mother did, the lies she told, that's not our fault. But it's not Anna's fault either. For the first time in my life, she looked at me without a trace of hostility or envy. He left that condition for a reason. He knew we need each other. You have his blood, she said to me, and we have the business training. Together, we can honor what he built. Apart, we will tear it all down. Is that what you want? In that moment, I thought about every Christmas where my gifts were noticeably smaller, every family dinner where I was the outsider, every condescending look from Aunt Beatrice. Vengeance was right there, served on a silver platter. I could take everything. I could leave them with nothing. I could make them feel, just for a moment, the way I had felt for 32 years. It would be justice, wouldn't it? But then I saw my father's face in that old photograph, the one celebrating his little miracle. I felt the crumpled note from the nurse in my pocket, and I heard his words from the letter, echoing in my mind, that the greatest Ashworth trait was the power to forgive and rebuild. What kind of Ashworth did I want to be? The one who destroys for the sake of justice, or the one who builds something new from the pain? His will is clear, I said finally, the words feeling solid and real in the quiet cafe. 1/3 for each of us, on the condition that we work together. We're going to honor his wishes. Mark stared at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why? Why would you do that for us? I managed a small, sad smile. Because I'm an Ashworth, I said. And my father taught me that that means something. The year that followed was like a river after a flood, fast, turbulent, and forever changing the landscape of our lives. The grand Ashworth mansion on Broad Street, once a house of suffocating secrets, was transformed. It was now home to the Charles Edward Ashworth Center for the Arts, a nonprofit offering gallery space to local artists and free workshops for underprivileged kids. I still lived on the property, in a renovated carriage house out back, and I kept my job teaching history at Northwood High. Even with the inheritance, I couldn't imagine leaving my students. Some legacies aren't measured in dollars. To everyone's astonishment, after threatening lawsuits and disappearing for 2 months on what he called a soul-searching road trip, Mark came back a different man. He took over as the administrative director of the new foundation. He was quieter, more thoughtful, as if the weight of pretending to be someone else had finally been lifted. I was just so tired of playing a part, he admitted to me one afternoon as we were setting up a community library in the old parlor. Aunt Beatrice moved to the south of France, unable to face the whispers and sideways glances of Charleston society. "My scandals will follow me here, I'm sure," she wrote in her one and only postcard. "But at least now they'll have a French accent." Claire flew out to see her twice a year, trying to piece together a relationship that had been built on a foundation of lies. Back home, Claire took the reins of the Ashworth business enterprises, and it turned out she had a sharp, intuitive mind for it that had always been overshadowed by her brother. "It's strange," she confessed to me over lunch one day. "I spent my entire life trying to prove I was a real Ashworth. It's only now, knowing that I'm not, that I finally feel like a part of this family." We both laughed, the kind of genuine laugh that washes away old wounds. My mother was finally free from the burden of her decades-long silence. "Your father made me swear I would never tell," she told me one evening as we looked through old photo albums on her porch in Savannah. "He knew it meant I'd always be seen as the gold-digging secretary who got lucky. But he didn't care. He said the truth would only bring pain to innocent children." She turned a page, revealing a photo of my father holding Mark and Claire as babies, the same look of fierce pride on his face that he had in photos with me. "He was a complicated man, your dad. He could forgive the ultimate betrayal from his sister, but he couldn't bring himself to confront her. He chose to carry the weight of all those secrets himself, rather than cause pain to the people he loved." Alexander Vance, the man we now knew to be Mark and Claire's biological father, returned from his self-imposed exile in Europe when the story inevitably broke. A tense meeting was arranged at a neutral site, a private dining room at the Grand Bohemian Hotel. He was an older man now, with graying hair and the exact same piercing eyes as Mark. He struggled not to weep as he looked at the two adult children he never knew he had. "Beatrice told me she'd terminated the pregnancy," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "When I saw you 2 years later, she swore you were her husband's. I had my suspicions, but she threatened to cause a scandal that would have ruined us all if I ever came near you." Mark, my cousin who had always been so stoic, collapsed into the arms of this stranger, his father, and sobbed like a child. Claire kept her distance, too wounded for another seismic shift in her identity. I watched it all, thinking about the strange cycles of life, how secrets are buried, how truth eventually claws its way to the surface, and how the healing of one wound can sometimes open another. On the 2nd anniversary of my father's death, we did something he had always wanted but that we had never managed. We gathered the whole family for a weekend at the beach house on Kiowa Island. The house, once a dusty tomb of secrets, was now bright and airy, its windows thrown open to the sea. Mark brought his new girlfriend, a therapist he'd met after finally seeking help to deal with everything. Claire came alone, but she was 3 months pregnant, and the quiet joy of it made her glow. My mom, lighter and happier than I'd ever seen her, made a huge low-country boil with the help of Mrs. Josie, who had come back to work with us, not as a housekeeper, but as a cherished friend. That night, we all sat on the deck under a full moon, listening to the waves crash on the shore. One by one, we told stories about my dad. "He taught me how to swim right out there," Mark said, pointing to the dark water. "I was terrified of the undertow, but he just held my hand and wouldn't let go until I wasn't scared anymore." Claire remembered how he never missed a single one of her ballet recitals. He'd always sneak in late and sit in the very back row, but he was always, always there. I told them about our trips to the Palmetto Scoop, our shared secret, and the quiet way he looked at me that always made me feel like the most important person in the world. Later, after everyone else had gone to bed, I stood on that deck alone, just listening to the ocean. The final line of my father's letter echoed in my head. "What matters more, Anna Grace, the blood that runs in our veins or the love that lives in our hearts?" I've learned that the answer isn't simple. My cousins who aren't my cousins, my aunt who isn't my aunt, and the father who was more of a father in his soul than many are by DNA. They all taught me that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. It's a choice you make every day through forgiveness and second chances. The Ashworth blood may only run through my veins, but the Ashworth spirit, the one my father truly valued, lives on in all of us who chose to honor not a name or a fortune, but the imperfect, messy, and very real love that he left behind. So let me ask you, If you were in my shoes, what would you have chosen? The sharp-edged truth that cuts, or the comfortable lie that protects? I chose a third path, the truth that, while painful, cleared the way for a love that was far more real.